I talked to Robin, who 20 years ago sailed a two-person yacht from Europe across the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans to New Zealand. He visited many Polynesian islands and faced the same challenges Polynesian sailors would have faced 800 years ago. He met Polynesian sailors on his way, sharing experiences. This gives us a great opportunity to consider the question, what were the challenges for Polynesian sailors 800 years ago sailing to New Zealand, and were they able to return to Polynesia? What were the chances of them establishing a sustainable population in New Zealand? Welcome, Robin, to our blog, Stepping Out of Your Bubble. You've had some interesting experiences. So let's start off first of all by looking at describing your experience in sailing a small vessel across big oceans and what you learnt, and particularly the routes you followed, the skills and experiences you had to have for that trip. Look forward to hearing from you.
Right, so we sailed the boat from France. It was a 13.5 metre yacht, sloop, rigged yacht made of fiberglass. And we sailed around the Mediterranean initially, mostly like a shakedown trip, the full length of the Mediterranean. And then we sailed down to Gibraltar, Morocco, the Cape Verde Islands, across the North Atlantic to the Caribbean, cruised the Caribbean for a season, and then went to the United States up to Florida, waited out the hurricane seasons, which you do, and then we sailed the boat back across the Caribbean Sea, down to the Panama Canal, visited some parts of Central America, sailed across through the Panama Canal, and from there to the Galapagos Islands, and then to French Polynesia, Tahiti, the Tuamotu group, the Society Islands, the Cook Islands, Tonga, Hapai Tonga, and down to New Zealand. And this route is a very common route for a lot of cruisers, mainly because of the trade winds. This route keeps you in the tropics where the weather patterns are quite predictable. You get to see a lot of the world that is difficult to see, very different to Europe. And you get to see very isolated parts of the world, a lot of beauty, a lot of isolation, a lot of nature. And so this route is very common for a lot of cruisers to make this trip. Many do not come down to New Zealand. Many people just continue and go to Australia and through the Malacca Strait. But for most circumnavigations, that blue water cruising navigation, most people would take that route.
Good. What were the main challenges you found on the trip?
Probably most of the challenges would be maintenance, maintaining the boat, carrying enough water. Food is very easy, plenty of fish in the sea, but water is always one of the critical things. Storage of water and maintaining water supply and repairing things, because the oceans are a very aggressive environment. Even for a modern boat, where things are built to last, they basically don't last. Everything gets worn out very quickly and damaged and breaks down. Ultraviolet is a killer as well. Basically wrecks all your sails and ropes, and any natural products get destroyed. Plastics and things like that get destroyed by ultraviolet and things break. But yeah, you've got sudden winds, a lot of movement with the boat, things just wear away just from movement of the boat. So yeah, it's quite an aggressive environment. And you've got to be awake 24/7. So you've got to have sleep turns on the boat and things like that to be able to maintain your heading and keep an eye on things on the boat. Things can go wrong quite quickly.
So what were the sea conditions like coming across the Pacific?
Well, we'd have up to 8 metre swells, not so much big waves, but basically The reason people take this route with the trade winds is you're sailing downwind. Sailing upwind is basically a no-no for any sort of cruising boat. But the conditions are big waves, quite a lot of wind, but obviously you're going in the right direction most of the time, which allows you to maintain your equipment without it getting too damaged quickly.
So in the South Pacific, the trade winds go anti-clockwise, which means from Polynesia, they head west.
That's right, yeah. You're basically in the northern part of the South Pacific. Once you get below the intertropical convergence zone, so you're south of the equator, you're going from South America across towards Australia. That's the basic winds take you that way. There are a few complications, but basically that's the basic trade winds.
And those winds blow all year round?
Yeah, most of the year. And they move north and south as the Earth tilts with the sun. So they do move during the seasons, and there are times to be there and times not to be there. There are times where there are possibly cyclones, so you avoid so most boats would sail through at a certain window where you've got steady trade winds and you've got no cyclones, or no lower risk of cyclones.
So Robin, given that tremendous sailing experience, what would you say would be the major challenges for Polynesian sailors coming towards New Zealand 800 years ago?
Well, I think the biggest differences are obviously in today's world, you know where you're going. We have marine charts and very detailed knowledge of any hazards at sea. We've got a lot of knowledge about where islands are positioned, that sort of thing. And we've got GPS and other and sextants and things like that. Also, we've got modern boat design. I mean, I mentioned that the ocean's a very aggressive environment. And most modern boats are constructed using metals, fiberglass, steel, and other aluminium masts. There's much more rigorous materials that are constructed. Wood's pretty good material for constructing boats out, but obviously even with a lot of the European navigators, there was a lot of people that didn't make it. A lot of people set sail and never made it to their destination for various reasons. So maintenance of a boat would be much harder with older materials. These are some of the issues. Obviously, also with a sailing vessel, the sails are very critical to the performance of the boat. And modern boats have got Dacron nylon sails, nylon ropes, and steel metal fittings, which assist with the boat. Building a boat out of natural materials and expecting it to survive for long periods in the ocean is pretty difficult. Carrying water, though, would be a big issue. If you've got a number of people on board, people need to drink water every day. You can rely to some extent on rain, but it doesn't rain that often. And obviously, some modern vessels have water makers where they can convert seawater to fresh drinking water. Otherwise, you've got to carry enough water. Food isn't that a big issue because people can survive for quite long periods without food. There is food available at sea, but fresh drinking water, which is disease-free, is probably, and I think the ancient mariners had these problems where fresh water was always one of the biggest issues.
And so how about the sail system, its capabilities going upwind?
I would say that you couldn't sail, old sail systems couldn't go upwind. They can go maybe an angle to the wind, but not upwind. But also when you're sailing at an angle to the wind, the ocean becomes more and more aggressive. When you're sailing downwind, the ocean's quite easy on your vessel. The more you go off that angle, the more aggressive the environment, and the boat would eventually get smashed to pieces, basically. I mean, my boat, I sailed it downwind, and sailing downwind is nice and calm and breezy, and it's very comfortable. As soon as you try and turn that boat around, though, even my modern boat would be smashed to pieces by trying to sail it for long distances against the wind. Right? If I want to go there, I've got to go like this, right? As soon as the wind moves, I'm going even further over, right? So this journey might take 30 days. This journey is going to take 60 days. But this is with a modern vessel. But every time you go off here, you've got to know what your angle is and where you're going and how far you're going. And then when I tack this way, if I just try to go that evenly, you're going to end up in a different position because the wind's moving. Each time the wind moves, your apparent wind direction changes. So, and that's with the boat that can sail into the wind. The modern boats will go into the wind because it uses an aerofoil section. The old square riggers, the old ships, European ships, or even these gaff rig ships, they can only sail at 45 degrees to the wind. So there's three ways to go. One would be to go into the northern hemisphere and pick up the trade winds and go all the way back round towards the Galapagos and then pick them up and come back again, which is you're sailing in a huge circle. Alternatively, you'd go into the southern hemisphere and go in the roaring 40s and go all the way around and approach it downwind again. Or probably the easiest way would be to go all the way around the world and back to where you started from, which is what the Europeans did. They never, you look at all the big European navigators, they all went all the way around the world. Like Cook went around the world 3 times. He didn't go back.
He just kept going.
He just kept going, yeah.
Interesting. So 800 years ago, what navigational techniques were used to sail the Pacific?
Well, I would say they probably were sailing in a general direction with the wind, because you don't really have much choice. So really you're basically going maybe 10 or 20 degrees either side of downwind. And the winds vary every day, and so they are more consistent in the trade wind periods. But you can't just decide I'm going to go off in this direction. You have to basically navigate your way there if you weren't going to go downwind. So the sails really were designed to just push the boat along, and the currents are travelling with the wind. So the currents are generated by those winds. So the currents, which are not insignificant, are also pushing the boat along in the same direction.
And of course, our Polynesian navigators didn't have sextants.
No, they did not. They would be basically travelling downwind, looking for land as they went.
And the number of islands between Polynesia and New Zealand are very few.
Very few, yes, yeah.
So
the oceans, until you get out in a boat and sail around for a few weeks, which some of these voyages, by the way, are about 4 weeks, it can be, the ocean is absolutely massive and the land masses are tiny. I think that's...
So standing in a small yacht or a waka, your vision of the horizon and ability to see land will be quite limited.
Yes. One of the issues with Polynesia is most of the Polynesian islands are extremely low-lying. And with the curvature of the earth, you can't see very far. Like if you're in the middle of the ocean and you see a big ocean-going ship, like a big oil tanker come your way, when it's more than about 12 to 15 nautical miles away, you cannot see that boat. You can't see another sailboat when it's only a few nautical miles away because it's around the curvature of the earth. So it's very difficult to observe things. So even if you want to look at an island and base it on its clouds, the cloud layer, you're still basically limited on the distance that you can see. You have to be quite close to somewhere to be able to see it.
So relying on the cloud cover over an island to be the place you're aiming for, you still need to be very close to it to be able to...
close to it to be able to see the cloud cover, yes. So you can't see indefinitely. If the world was flat, it would be quite easy, but the world's curved.
So how about the notion for navigation purposes of following bird paths or currents. We'd like to comment on that.
Well, currents are easy to follow. I mean, you basically, if you're sailing downwind, which most 99% of navigators do, all the great circumnavigators, like Magellan and Cook and all these people, all sail downwind. They all sail downwind for a reason, and that's because it's doable. And the currents take you, and the currents go because that's where the wind's blowing. So the currents are set up by the winds. So birds, to follow a bird is extremely difficult. In fact, my experience was the opposite, that birds follow you. So we had a lot of birds would follow the boat for maybe up to a week at a time, where the bird would just fly behind the boat, following us, and fly off every now and again and get some fish. Migrating birds, though, fly at much higher speeds than your sailing boat. So whilst you might see a migrating bird, you'd only see it for a very short period and then it's gone on to its destination. So you might have an idea to go in a particular direction because you think you see a bird, but to follow it will be another question, because they fly anything between 15 and 25 knots, and your boat's travelling between, say, 3 and 6 knots.
Because they never had the advantage of knowing, oh, there was a place there called New Zealand, 2 islands or whatever.
Yeah.
And that information never went back. So how do they know where to come?
That's my concept, is to be able to navigate with a star map. First of all is, where are these star maps, and how do you communicate something without a written language that gives you enough accuracy to be able to say, go to Rapa Nui, or even Hawaii. I mean, Hawaii is pretty small. To be able to sail from Tahiti to New Zealand, somehow that information's got to be communicated. So to have that communicated to you, you've got to be able to go from New Zealand back to Tahiti and tell somebody. So my question is, how did they do that when I don't think they could sail back that way? So they got to Tahiti, and the Cook Islands, probably going through the Northern Hemisphere, but to then discover New Zealand and then go back there is, to communicate that star map or this information, you've got to be able to carry it back. So basically these people probably left Tahiti for all sorts of various reasons. And this is, what are the motivations for leaving? It could be starvation. Did they outgrow the resources? Did some guy sleep with the chief's wife, so he got banished? There's all these social reasons for people leaving a place. And when they set off, they probably got in these boats, set off, and were never seen again. And a proportion of them, and I don't know what that would be, made it to New Zealand or Samoa or Tonga or other Chatham Islands and survived. But the concept that they built these big hokalias and sailed all around the Pacific and traded with each other and all knew about each other.
In your view, how feasible would it be for a fleet of double-hulled waka be able to sail together from Polynesia to New Zealand?
Right, to sail from Polynesia to New Zealand, not too difficult. To sail with a group of other boats and stay together is pretty difficult. During my sailing experience, I would leave, say when we left Gran Canaria to go across the North Atlantic, there's probably 250 boats all leave on the same day, all going to the same destination, and you never see another boat during the 4 weeks during the passage. And there's a number of reasons for that. One is that all the boats have all got different speeds, and a boat will have naturally different speeds due to its design and shape and length, etc. Two, there's the curvature of the earth, so they don't have to be very far apart for you to be able to not see them. And modern boats tend to be much higher above the water. They have a high freeboard. A waka, or an ancient boat, very low to the ground, so therefore your visibility is much, much smaller. And so when I was sailing, we tried to keep in touch, and we did by radio. So talking to people by radio and sharing your position, even to try and sail towards them, was quite difficult. So you've got navigation lights, which you can obviously see a boat from its masthead from a distance. Once you've been at sea a day or two, the different speeds and different wind and conditions that different boats experience, etc., the sail sizes, they'll all be completely in different locations and all going in the same general direction, but the ocean's huge and these boats just get completely lost. And things like tying them together is not practical either, because one would go up a wave and one would go down another wave and it would rip the boats apart. So basically it would be every man for himself, each boat for himself. And then of course, when they would arrive in New Zealand, if, maybe not all the boats would arrive in New Zealand, some would go off to a different location or never make the journey. But they would all arrive in different places, make landfall at different places, depending on how they approached the North Island in the first place. It stretches the your water resources. So you've got more water to carry, more food to carry, probably more chance of disease. If you look at the European navigators, they would set off and have very high attrition rates of people at sea. So Cook was famous because he managed to circumnavigate the globe with no loss of crew. That was one of the things he was famous for. In fact, he did lose somebody the day they left at Portsmouth. He was pulled over by an anchor, I believe. But he basically sailed around the world without losing any of his crew. And that was not the case with a lot of other ships. A lot of European ships have sailed around and the attrition rate's quite high. So it wouldn't have been any different for Polynesian navigators. So how many people set off and how many people arrived and how many people got lost and never made it, the questions we'll never know, but I wouldn't think that they all arrive.
So what are your views on modern attempts to replicate the Polynesian voyages? There's been boats like the Hokulea built in particular to try and do the same sort of voyages that the Polynesians did 800 years ago.
Well, the first thing is the construction of the boat. These boats are built with modern materials and they've got ropes and pulleys, which is not a concept that Polynesians had. They might have had some form of ropes, but the sail structures and the boat construction was totally different. Probably storage of water would have been a big issue. Maintaining the boat en route, but the first and major issue is if you're going to sail the boat from Tahiti to New Zealand, you know where you're going with an objective in mind. I think when the Polynesians sailed to New Zealand, they sailed here not knowing what was here and found it by chance, and more and more of them came until the population grew. But you've basically got to have an idea where you're going. So all the replications have been, they're trying to repeat something that's already been done and everybody knows how to do it. So they're not really replicating it using the materials and the technology that was used by early Polynesian settlers, because I would think that the chances of survival would be quite small. I mean, obviously, the early Polynesian navigators had skill with some of these materials that's been lost. I would say to set sail from Tahiti in a raft or a waka without any modern navigation, without any modern water systems, without any modern sails would be pretty much a one-way trip, which would result in not surviving. The chances of survival would be quite small, I would think.
And so in the case of, the Hokulea example, what sort of navigation techniques did they employ?
Well, I'm told that Hokulea used no modern navigation systems, but I'm not convinced of that, to be honest with you. I mean, to find Rapa Nui would be a good example. Rapa Nui is a very, very small island in a massive ocean. To find that without prior knowledge of where it is and using currents and stars and birds is not really practical, in my opinion.
I did note on their website they did allow people to follow their journey, which meant they had GPS systems on board.
Yeah, they had a GPS on board anyway. Yeah, I know of that.
Yep.
These double-hulled whackers didn't exist, not to my knowledge anyway. And so if travelling around the islands and trading was a successful practice, it would have increased, which it has anywhere else in the world. And it didn't increase, it got eliminated. So obviously it wasn't a very useful way of living your life, trying to sail around Polynesia, because it's too difficult.
What's the big area?
And to not a lot of gain. What would be the gain would be, New Zealand was a great place for people to come because it had a huge amount of space and resource. No need to go back. This is probably why they came here, looking for new resources and a new place to live, new opportunities, and it's all here. There's no real economic driver to leave. The big questions, of course, are how did they get to the numbers that they got to? If they just came here ad hocly, and if I don't really know what percentage would survive that trip. Probably easier to survive trying to get to New Zealand because it's a bigger island, but going off the other direction to Rapa Nui and some of the southern islands like Pitcairn and places like that, chances of survival are pretty
close to nil.
Yeah.
They needed to take women with them on the
Yes.
waka if they wanted to establish a population.
Yeah, well, it's interesting if you look at Hokulea, it's 100% male. It's 100% male crew. From what I've seen, the names of anyway, yeah. So, they must have taken females, they must have brought females here, but what proportion were they on the vessels? And were they, because whole families got banished, were they leaving with us a whole family purely for survival reasons? So a good example is Rapa Nui. They outgrew their resources on the island. Now they couldn't leave because they were in the middle of nowhere. So people didn't really leave Rapa Nui until they were discovered by the Europeans. But let's say did this happen in Tahiti? Did the population get too big? They ran out of fish. If you look at Kupi's story, was that they went fishing and couldn't catch fish. Was that because it was overfished? Was it, did they outgrow their resources? So groups left, families left in their entirety to come to New Zealand or find somewhere else to live because staying wasn't an option. I think, yes, people sailed here. I don't believe that they regularly travelled around the islands easily because it's too difficult.
And also, when the wakas arrived in New Zealand, they're at different locations, and that's well recognised.
Yes.
So how do they have the numbers to really generate a sustainable population, given that the numbers of childbearing age women could have been in the minority?
Well, I've read that there was 75. This is where the theory comes along, that there was 75 females that came with this group, and that all these, the complete population was built from those. But I don't know whether the maths stacks up to that.
Well, that's one very big waka, and none of the replicas are anything near that size.
No.